The notification sound pierced through the quiet morning air as I sat in the HR office, my hands still trembling from the adrenaline. I glanced down at my phone and saw 23 missed calls from my father and a string of text messages from my sister Brooke that made my blood run cold. "You destroyed everything. Dad lost his job. They're talking about pressing charges against you. Come home now or you'll regret this for the rest of your pathetic life." But I wasn't going home. Not ever again. Because 3 hours earlier, I had watched my father's carefully constructed world crumble to ashes, and I was the one who lit the match. But before I tell you how I burned his world to the ground, I need to know you're with me. If you've ever been the family punching bag, the one whose dreams got crushed so someone else could smash that like button right now. Subscribe if you're done being invisible. Comment if you're ready to hear how I fought back. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just my story. It's the blueprint for breaking free. Now let me take you back to the morning that changed everything. I had always been the disappointment. That was my role in the Jensen family dynamic, as fixed and unchangeable as the foundation of our 2-story colonial house in suburban Massachusetts. My sister Brooke was the golden child, the one whose every whim was catered to, whose every tantrum was justified, whose every failure was someone else's fault. And I was the ghost, the one who worked 3 jobs to pay for community college classes in computer science, the one whose bedroom was actually the converted attic with heating that barely worked in winter. I was 25 years old and still living at home. Not because I wanted to, but because every time I saved enough money to move out, some family emergency would arise. Brooke needed money for a trip to Miami with her friends. Mom needed help with the mortgage because Dad's consulting business was having a slow month. The car needed repairs. The roof needed fixing. And somehow it was always my savings account that got drained. Always my dreams that got deferred. Always my needs that could wait. My father, Robert Jensen, was a man who measured worth in dollar signs and social status. He sat on the local planning board and did consulting work for small businesses, which gave him just enough authority to feel important and just enough connections to make life difficult for anyone who crossed him. He had perfected the art of the cutting remark, the dismissive gesture, the way of making you feel small without ever raising his voice in public. At home, though, the mask came off. My mother, Carol, was a different kind of toxic. She wasn't actively cruel like Dad or smugly manipulative like Brooke. She was passively complicit, the kind of person who would sigh and say, "You know how your father is," or "Why do you always have to stir up trouble?" She had mastered the art of looking the other way, of making my suffering somehow my own fault for not being more accommodating, more understanding, more invisible. For years, I told myself it would get better. I told myself that once I finished my degree, once I got that job in tech, once I proved myself, they would finally see me as something other than the family's designated servant and emotional punching bag. I look back now and realize how naive that was. People like my father don't suddenly develop respect for those they've spent years conditioning to accept disrespect. I had an interview at Tech Vista at 10 a.m., a rising startup in software development that could change everything. This junior developer position wasn't just a job. It was my ticket out. Real benefits, career growth, a future that didn't involve choosing between rent and groceries. I'd spent weeks preparing drilling coding challenges until my eyes burned memorizing every detail about the company, rehearsing answers in front of my bathroom mirror. I'd even splurged on a thrift store blazer and paid to have it dry cleaned. That interview represented every sacrifice I'd made, every night I'd stayed up teaching myself to code after double shifts. It was my one shot at freedom. I woke up at 6, my stomach tight with nervous excitement. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop reviewing my portfolio one more time. The house was quiet, everyone else still asleep. For a moment, I let myself imagine what life would be like if I got this job. An apartment of my own, maybe, with a real bedroom and a kitchen where I could cook actual meals. No more walking on eggshells, no more being the family's ATM, no more listening to Brooke complain about her life being so hard while she'd never worked a day in her life. At 8:30, I went upstairs to get dressed. I was pulling on my blazer when Brooke burst into my room without knocking, something she'd done my entire life, because privacy was apparently another thing I wasn't entitled to. "I need you to drive me to the mall," she announced, scrolling through her phone without even looking at me. She was wearing designer sweatpants that I knew cost more than my entire outfit and had her highlighted hair pulled into a messy bun that probably took 30 minutes to achieve that perfect, careless look. "I can't, Brooke. I have my interview this morning," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady even as my heart rate kicked up. I knew what was coming. She finally looked up from her phone, her face twisting into that familiar expression of entitled indignation. "What interview? For what another barista job, Riley? I have plans. Madison and Tyler are meeting me at 11, and I need to be there early to hit the good stores before they get crowded. This is for Tech Vista. It's a real career opportunity, and I've been preparing for months. You have your own car. You can drive yourself." Her eyes narrowed. "My car is making a weird noise, and you know I hate driving when it does that. Besides, this is important. Do you know how hard it is to find decent fall clothes? You wouldn't understand because you dress like you shop at a garage sale." The jab didn't even sting anymore. I'd heard variations of it my entire life. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you today. This interview could change my life." "Whatever!" she snapped, and I heard her stomp down the stairs. I knew what came next. I'd lived this script 1,000 times before. 2 minutes later, my father's heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs. He appeared in my doorway, his face already red with anger, still wearing his bathrobe but radiating that authoritative fury he'd perfected over years of bullying people smaller and weaker than himself. "Your sister needs a ride to the mall," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Dad, I have a job interview in an hour. I told Brooke I can't." "I don't care about your little interview." He cut me off, stepping into my room. "Your sister's social life is important. She's building connections, making friends with people who matter. What are you doing? Wasting time on some pipe dream about being a programmer. You barely graduated from community college, Riley. You think some tech company is going to hire you." The words were designed to wound, and they did, but I'd built up scar tissue over the years. What made my hands clench into fists was the casual cruelty of it, the way he could dismiss everything I'd worked for as if it were nothing, as if I were nothing. "I'm going to this interview," I said quietly, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. His face darkened. "The hell you are. You live under my roof, you follow my rules. You'll take your sister to the mall, and then maybe we'll discuss whether you're mature enough to hold down a real job." "No." The word came out before I could stop it, and I saw his expression shift from anger to genuine rage. "What did you say to me?" "I said no. I'm going to my interview." I moved toward the door, but he blocked my path, his 6'2" frame filling the doorway. "You ungrateful little bitch," he hissed. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. Your mother and I let you live here rent-free. Rent-free." The laugh that escaped me was bitter and sharp. "Dad, I've given you thousands of dollars over the past 3 years. Every time you had a business setback or Mom needed help with bills, it was my money that bailed you out. I'm not living here rent-free. I'm subsidizing Brooke's lifestyle." His hand moved so fast I barely saw it coming. He shoved me backwards with both hands against my shoulders, and I stumbled, falling hard against the wall. A framed photograph of Brooke's high school graduation crashed to the floor, glass shattering across the hardwood. Pain exploded through my shoulder where it had connected with the wall, radiating down my arm. "You don't talk to me like that," he said, standing over me. "You want to know what you are? You're nothing. You're a burden we've carried for 25 years. No company wants you, Riley. No one wants you. You're mediocre at best, and the sooner you accept your place in this family, the easier your life will be." I looked up at him from the floor, tasting blood where I'd bitten my lip, and something inside me fractured. Not broke, fractured. Like ice that's been hit with just the right amount of force, a web of cracks spreading from a single point of impact. And through those cracks, something hot and fierce began to seep through. Brooke appeared behind him in the doorway, chewing gum and smirking. "Told you she'd freak out," she said casually, like she was commenting on the weather. "She's always so dramatic." My mother's voice drifted up from downstairs. "What's all the noise, Riley? Are you causing problems again?" That's when it happened. That's when something fundamental shifted in my understanding of my place in the world. I wasn't going to be the victim of this story anymore. I was going to be the villain they always accused me of being, except I was going to do it on my own terms. I pulled myself to my feet, ignoring the throbbing in my shoulder. My phone was on my dresser. I picked it up and opened my contacts. "What are you doing?" my father demanded. "I'm leaving. I'm going to my interview, and if you try to stop me, I'll call the police and report you for assault." My voice didn't shake. It was cold, flat, certain. He laughed. "No one would believe you. You think they'd take your word over mine? I'm Robert Jensen. I sit on the planning board. I know the chief of police. You're a nobody." "Then I guess we'll find out," I said, and I called Harper. Harper Davis had been my best friend since our sophomore year at community college. While I'd stayed local scraping by, she'd finished her degree and landed a job in human resources at Technova, a branch of the same parent company that owned Tech Vista. She was smart-driven and had a spine of steel. When she answered on the second ring, I didn't bother with pleasantries. "Harper, I need you to pick me up, now. I'll explain when you get here." "I'm 15 minutes away," she said without hesitation. I could hear her car keys already jingling. I pushed past my father, past Brooks' satisfied smirk, and headed down the stairs. He followed, yelling about disrespect and consequences, but I kept walking. My mother emerged from the kitchen, wringing her hands. "Riley, please don't do this. You're tearing this family apart." I stopped and looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time in years. "Mom, this family was torn apart a long time ago. I was just too busy trying to hold it together to notice." Robert grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into the same shoulder he'd shoved into the wall. "You walk out that door, you don't come back." I pulled free, yanked open the front door, and stepped out into the crisp September morning. "Don't worry, Dad, I wouldn't dream of it." I waited on the curb, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Behind me, I could hear my father shouting from the doorway, threatening to call the police himself to report me for theft for taking my own belongings to have me evicted from the house. Brooks' voice joined in shrill and accusatory. "My mother just cried." Harper's Honda Civic appeared at the end of the street like a getaway car in a heist movie. She pulled up to the curb, and I threw myself into the passenger seat. "Drive, I said, and she did. We were 3 blocks away before either of us spoke. Harper glanced over at me, her dark eyes sharp with concern. "Want to tell me what happened?" So I did. I told her about the interview, about Brooks' demand, about my father's rage and his hands on my shoulders, and the wall and the glass and the words that cut deeper than any physical wound. By the time I finished, we were pulling into the parking lot of a Starbucks, and Harper had a look on her face I'd never seen before. It was cold calculation mixed with righteous fury. "Let me see your shoulder," she said. I pulled down the collar of my blazer and the tank top underneath. The skin was already darkening into what would be a spectacular bruise, purple and angry and undeniable. Harper took out her phone and snapped several photos. "We're documenting this. Everything. Every text, every call, every interaction from here on out. Do you understand? Harper, I just need to get to this interview. I can deal with family drama later." She grabbed my hand. "Riley, listen to me. This isn't family drama. This is abuse. And based on what you've told me over the years, this is a pattern. Your father has been systematically breaking you down, keeping you dependent, and stealing your money to fund your sister's lifestyle. This is financial exploitation at minimum, and now it's physical assault. We're not letting this go." "What can I do?" "He's right about one thing, he has connections. Who's going to believe me?" "We're going to make them believe you," she said firmly. "But first, we're going to nail this interview. Come on, let's get you cleaned up and caffeinated." In the Starbucks bathroom, I assessed the damage. My lip was swollen where I'd bitten it, my shoulder throbbed, and my hands were still shaking from adrenaline. But my eyes, when I looked at them in the mirror, were clear, maybe for the first time in years. Harper waited outside, and when I emerged, she handed me a coffee and a breakfast sandwich. "Eat. You need energy, and then we're going to turn you into the most confident candidate Tech Vista has ever seen." The interview was at 9:45. We had 30 minutes. Harper drove while I ate, coaching me through breathing exercises to calm my racing heart. By the time we pulled into Tech Vista's parking lot, a modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows and a lobby full of young professionals typing on laptops, I had regained some sense of control. "You've got this," Harper said. "You're brilliant, you're qualified, and you've worked harder than anyone I know to get here. Show them what you're made of." I walked into that building with my bruised shoulder hidden under my blazer and my bitten lip covered with carefully applied lipstick. The interview was with Marcus Chen, the head of development, and Sarah Winters, the product manager. They were both in their 30s, casually dressed in the tech industry uniform of jeans and company-branded hoodies, and they put me at ease immediately. We talked about my portfolio, the projects I'd built on my own time, my approach to problem solving. Marcus threw coding challenges at me, and I worked through them on the whiteboard, explaining my logic as I went. Sarah asked about teamwork and communication, and I gave examples from my various jobs framing my ability to work with difficult people as an asset without mentioning that the difficult people were my own family. An hour flew by, then another. They brought in another team member, Alex Rodriguez, who grilled me on debugging strategies and version control. I held my own. I was good at this. I'd always been good at this. I just hadn't had anyone in my life who bothered to notice. At the end, Marcus smiled and said, "We'll be in touch by the end of the week." It wasn't a rejection, but it wasn't an offer either. I walked back to Harper's car, feeling hollowed out, exhausted from the adrenaline crash, the emotional upheaval, and the effort of performing normalcy when my entire life had just imploded. Harper took one look at my face and said, "Let's go to my place. You're staying with me." Her apartment was a one-bedroom in a complex 20 minutes away, small but clean and entirely her own. She made up the couch for me, brought me ice for my shoulder, and sat down with a serious expression. "Okay, now we need to talk about next steps. I'm assuming you're not going back to your parents' house." "Never," I said with certainty. "Good, because I have something to show you." She opened her laptop and pulled up her email. "This came to our HR department this morning at 8:47, exactly when you would have been getting ready for your interview." She turned the screen toward me. It was an email from my father's business email address to the Tech Vista HR department. The subject line read, "Concerning Riley Jensen interview." My stomach dropped as I read it. My father had written to Tech Vista claiming I had a history of mental instability, that I'd been in and out of therapy for violent episodes that I'd stolen from previous employers, and that he felt it was his civic duty to warn them before they made a hiring mistake. He'd signed it with his full name and credentials, lending it an air of authority and parental concern. "Oh my God," I whispered. "He's trying to sabotage me." "He already has been," Harper said grimly. "I did some digging this morning. Do you remember that software company you interviewed with 6 months ago, DataCore? Yeah, they never called me back. That's because your father sent them a similar email, and the accounting firm last spring, and the marketing agency before that. Riley, he's been systematically torpedoing your job applications for at least a year, maybe longer. Every time you get close to independence, he pulls the rug out." The room spun. All those rejections, all those times I'd wondered what I'd done wrong in interviews that seemed to go well, all those moments of self-doubt and questioning my abilities. It hadn't been me. It had been him working behind the scenes to keep me trapped, keep me dependent, keep me under his control. "How did you find this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I have friends in HR at other companies. We network. When I saw his email this morning, I started making calls. 3 of them confirmed they'd received similar messages about you. The only reason Tech Vista didn't act on it is because the email came in after Marcus had already reviewed your application and invited you to interview. It went to HR but hadn't been flagged yet." "So what do I do? How do I fight this?" Harper's expression hardened. "We burn it all down, methodically, carefully, and completely. But we do it smart with evidence and strategy. Are you with me?" I thought about my father's hands on my shoulders, the contempt in his eyes, the casual cruelty of destroying my future to maintain his control. I thought about Brooke's smirk and my mother's willful blindness. I thought about all the years I'd made myself small, swallowed my anger, sacrificed my dreams for people who saw me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. "I'm with you," I said. "What's the plan?" Harper smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who knew how to navigate systems, how to build cases, and how to make powerful men face consequences. Over the next 2 days, we worked like we were preparing for a legal trial. Harper, with her HR background and her network of professional contacts, became my general in this war. First, we documented everything. She'd already taken photos of my bruised shoulder, but we went further. I wrote down every instance of financial exploitation I could remember with dates, amounts, and contexts. We pulled my bank statements showing recurring transfers to my parents' account, always just large enough to keep me from building real savings, but not so large that I'd completely break. Harper helped me retrieve emails from my trash folder messages from my father asking for loans that were never repaid, Venmo requests from Brooke for shopping trips and concert tickets, texts from my mother guilting me into covering bills. We had years of evidence, a pattern so clear it was damning. Then Harper made a call to Rachel Morrison, a friend who worked in HR at my father's consulting firm. It was a risk, but Harper trusted her, and Rachel was furious when she heard what had happened. She couldn't give us internal documents without risking her job, but she confirmed that Robert Jensen had a reputation for being difficult and had received several complaints about his behavior with junior staff. Nothing had been formally filed, but there were whispers. The second part of our strategy focused on the emails he'd sent to my prospective employers. Harper reached out to her contacts at DataCore and the other companies explaining that the emails had been sent without my knowledge by a family member attempting to sabotage my career due to a personal dispute. She provided them with copies of the threatening texts from Brooke, the photos of my injury, and a timeline that established a clear pattern of harassment and control. Two of the HR managers were immediately sympathetic. One even admitted that the email had seemed off too emotionally charged to be genuinely professional, but they'd erred on the side of caution. With context, they understood they'd been manipulated. Then came the most crucial step. Harper helped me file for a restraining order against both my father and Brooke. The threshold for a temporary order was low. We just needed to demonstrate a credible threat, and we had that in spades. The photos of my bruise, the threatening texts from Brooke promising I'd regret my actions, the emails to employers showing a campaign of harassment, it all added up. But we didn't stop there. Harper suggested something that made my hands shake when I first heard it. We would file a formal complaint with Robert's employer and the local planning board. The emails he'd sent to my employers had come from his business email, which meant he'd used company resources for personal vendettas. That was a terminable offense at most companies. And his behavior, if brought to light, would reflect poorly on the planning board's judgment in having him as a member. "Are you sure about this?" I asked Harper as we sat in her apartment, the complaint letters drafted and ready to send. "This will destroy him." "Riley," she said, looking me straight in the eye. "He was trying to destroy you. He's been trying for years. The only difference is that you're fighting back, and he never expected that. He thought you'd always roll over and take it. This is what consequences look like." I thought about that for a long time. I wasn't naturally vindictive. I'd spent my whole life trying to be the peacemaker, the one who absorbed the blows so others wouldn't have to. But Harper was right. My father had declared war on my future, and he'd done it assuming I was too weak, too broken, too conditioned to fight back. He'd underestimated me, they all had. The next morning, we sent the complaint letters, one to Robert's employer detailing his misuse of company email for personal harassment, and including screenshots of the messages he'd sent to my prospective employers. One to the planning board outlining his abuse of his position and connections to threaten a family member's livelihood, along with a note that we were prepared to go to local media if the matter wasn't handled appropriately. And one to the police filing the report about the assault and requesting the restraining order. Then we waited. The response came faster than I expected. By that afternoon, my phone was exploding with calls and texts from my family. My father called 17 times in 2 hours. I didn't answer. Brooke sent a barrage of texts that evolved from angry to panicked as the day wore on. "What did you do?" Dad's boss called him in for a meeting. "You fucking bitch, you're ruining everything! Call Dad back right now. This is so typical of you always playing the victim. Do you know what you've done? Do you have any idea? Fine, ignore me, but when this all blows up in your face, don't come crying to us." My mother's messages were different, dripping with false sweetness and manipulation. "Riley, honey, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Your father is very upset. Maybe we should all sit down and talk about this calmly. You know how family is, we fight sometimes, but we still love each other. Please come home so we can work this out." I showed the messages to Harper. "She's trying to rug sweep," Harper said. "Classic enabler behavior. She wants you to come back so they can pressure you to drop the complaints and go back to the status quo. Don't engage." But I did respond to my mother just once. "Mom, I'm not coming home. I filed for a restraining order against Dad and Brooke. You chose to stand by while they abused me, and now you get to live with the consequences of that choice. I hope it was worth it." She called immediately. I sent it to voicemail. She called again, and again. On the fourth call, I blocked her number. The next 2 weeks were a blur of legal procedures and waiting. The temporary restraining order was granted, prohibiting my father and Brooke from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of me. The hearing for a permanent order was scheduled for a month out. Meanwhile, the professional consequences for my father began to roll in like a tsunami. His employer, a mid-sized consulting firm, put him on immediate administrative leave while they investigated. The planning board called an emergency meeting to discuss his conduct. And then, because Harper had strategically mentioned to one of her media contacts that a local planning board member was under investigation for harassment and abuse of power, a reporter from the local newspaper started asking questions. The article came out on a Friday. It was carefully worded to avoid libel, focusing on the factual aspects. Robert Jensen, planning board member and business consultant, was under investigation by his employer for alleged misuse of company resources. A family member had filed for a restraining order citing harassment and assault. The planning board was reviewing his position. In a small town like ours, that article was dynamite. By Monday, everyone knew. My father's carefully constructed image as a respectable community member was crumbling, replaced by whispers and speculation. And then, something I hadn't expected happened. Other people started coming forward. A woman he'd worked with 2 years ago filed a complaint about his behavior at a company conference. A junior member of the planning board made a statement about Robert's bullying tactics in meetings. Harper's friend Rachel provided a confidential report to her company's ethics board about the pattern of complaints they'd previously swept under the rug. My father had made a career out of being untouchable, but he'd done it by intimidating people into silence. Once that silence broke, the floodgates opened. 2 weeks after I'd walked out of my parents' house, Robert Jensen was fired from his consulting firm. 3 days later, he resigned from the planning board under pressure, the alternative being a public vote to remove him. And through it all, my phone continued to blow up with messages from Brooke and my mother, alternating between blame and pleas for mercy. "You've destroyed this family," Brooke wrote. "Dad lost his job because of you. We might lose the house. Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted?" What I wanted was for them to understand what they'd done, to take responsibility, to show even a shred of remorse or self-awareness. But that was never going to happen. People like my father don't see themselves as the villains of their own stories. In their minds, I was the ungrateful daughter who'd betrayed them, not the victim who'd finally fought back. The only family member who reached out with anything resembling empathy was my Aunt Linda, my mother's sister. We'd never been close. She lived in Oregon, and I'd only seen her a handful of times, but she sent me an email 3 weeks into this whole ordeal. "Riley, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry you went through this. I want you to know that I believe you. Your mother called me crying, asking me to talk sense into you. I told her that maybe it's time she looked at her own family and asked herself what kind of sense was there to begin with. You did the right thing. I'm proud of you." I cried when I read that email, the first real tears I'd shed since this all began. Someone in my family saw me. Someone believed me. It mattered more than I'd expected. On a Wednesday afternoon, 4 weeks after I'd left home, I got a call from Marcus Chen at Tech Vista. My heart jumped into my throat. I'd assumed the drama with my father had killed my chances, even though Harper had reached out to their HR department to explain the situation. "Riley, I wanted to give you a call personally," Marcus said, and I braced myself for the rejection. "We'd like to offer you the junior developer position. Your technical skills impressed all of us, and frankly, after HR explained what you've been dealing with, it makes your achievements even more remarkable. Someone who can teach themselves to code while working 3 jobs and dealing with that kind of family situation is exactly the kind of resilient, determined person we want on our team." I couldn't speak for a moment. Harper, who was sitting across from me in her apartment where I'd been crashing for a month, grabbed my hand. "Riley, you still there?" "I'm here," I managed. "I accept. Thank you so much." We discussed start dates, salary benefits, all the practical details, but I barely heard them. I'd done it. Despite everything, despite my father's best efforts to sabotage me, despite the chaos and the trauma and the family implosion, I'd done it. When I hung up, Harper whooped and pulled me into a hug. "I knew it. I knew they'd see how amazing you are." The job came with a decent salary enough that I could afford to rent a small studio apartment in the city, a 40-minute commute from Tech Vista, but blissfully far from my parents' house. Harper helped me apartment hunt, and we found a tiny place with a kitchenette and a bathroom that actually had good water pressure and a window that looked out over a small park. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Entirely, completely mine. Moving day was bittersweet. I didn't have much stuff to move. Most of my belongings were still at my parents' house, and I had no intention of going back there, even with a restraining order in place. I'd called a friend from one of my old jobs, Alex, who was big and kind and had a truck, and he'd volunteered to go with a police escort to collect my things while I waited at Harper's. He came back with boxes of my clothes, my laptop, some books, and a few random items that had survived my childhood. "Your mom tried to talk to me," Alex reported. "Kept saying this was all a misunderstanding, that you were being influenced by bad friends. The cop shut her down pretty quick." "Did you see my dad?" I asked. "Nope. Your mom said he was at a job interview, or maybe she said he was meeting with a lawyer, I don't know." I stopped listening. I set up my tiny apartment over a weekend with Harper's help and contributions from a few other friends who'd heard what happened and wanted to support me. They brought me kitchen supplies, a cheap but comfortable futon curtains, a lamp shaped like a robot that made me laugh. My apartment was eclectic and mismatched and absolutely perfect. My first day at Tech Vista was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I showed up 30 minutes early, dressed in new professional clothes I'd bought with my first paycheck advance, and tried not to vibrate out of my skin with nervous energy. Marcus introduced me to the team, showed me to my desk, a real desk in a real office with a computer and dual monitors and everything I needed to do the job I'd dreamed about for years. The work was challenging, but I was good at it. Better than good. I threw myself into learning the codebase, understanding the products, contributing to projects. My coworkers were friendly and supportive, treating me like a peer rather than an annoyance to be tolerated. For the first time in my life, I felt valued for my skills rather than tolerated for my utility. Weeks turned into months. I settled into my job, my apartment, my new life. The restraining order was made permanent at the hearing, which my father and Brooke didn't even bother to contest. Through the legal grapevine, I heard that my father had found a new job, but it was a significant step down from his previous position, with less prestige and less pay. Brooke had apparently taken a job at a retail store, her first job ever at 23, because the family finances had gotten tight. My mother continued to try to reach out through various means, new phone numbers, emails from accounts I didn't recognize, the messages passed through distant relatives. Each time the message was the same: "Please come back. Please forgive us. Please don't throw away this family." Never an acknowledgement of what they'd done. Never an apology, just a demand that I absorb their actions and move on for the sake of family unity. I never responded. There was nothing to say. 6 months into my new job, I got a promotion. It came with a raise and more responsibility, and Marcus told me I was on track to become a senior developer within 2 years if I kept up my performance. I celebrated by taking Harper out to a nice dinner and buying myself a new laptop for personal coding projects. That same week, I ran into Brooke at a grocery store. It was completely accidental. I was shopping after work and turned a corner to find her standing in the frozen food aisle, looking exhausted and diminished in a way I'd never seen before. She saw me at the same moment I saw her, and for a second we just stared at each other. She looked like she wanted to say something, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. I could see the calculation in her eyes, weighing whether to approach me, whether to spit venom or try to appeal to some sisterly bond that had never actually existed. I didn't give her the chance. I turned my cart around and walked away, my heart pounding, but my steps steady. I didn't need closure from Brooke. I didn't need anything from any of them anymore. The last I heard about my father came from Aunt Linda, who called me 8 months after I'd left home. "Your mother's divorcing Robert," she said without preamble. "She filed last week. Apparently, the financial stress and the shame of everything that came out was too much. Also, I think some of his former coworkers' wives stopped inviting her to their social functions, and that was the final straw for Carol." "How does she think I'll react to that news?" I asked. "She's hoping you'll feel sorry for her and come back to be her support system," Linda said bluntly. "I told her that ship has sailed, but you know your mother. She still thinks if she just finds the right words, you'll forget everything that happened." "I haven't forgotten," I said. "I never will, but I've moved forward, and that's not the same thing as forgiving or forgetting." "Good," Linda said. "You're stronger than I ever was, Riley. I'm proud of you." A year after I walked out of my parents' house, I went on my first real vacation. Harper and I flew to Seattle for a long weekend, staying in a hostel and exploring the city like tourists. We visited the Space Needle, ate amazing food, wandered through Pike Place Market, and spent an entire day at the Museum of Pop Culture. Standing at the top of the Space Needle, looking out over the city with the wind whipping through my hair, I felt something I'd rarely experienced before: pure, uncomplicated joy. No anxiety about getting home before curfew. No dread about what mood my father would be in. No calculation about how to make myself small enough to avoid conflict. Just joy and freedom and the vast open possibility of a future that was entirely my own to create. "You okay?" Harper asked, noticing my tears. "I'm perfect," I said, and I meant it. I still have the bruise, sometimes psychologically speaking. There are moments when I doubt myself when I hear my father's voice in my head telling me I'm nothing, when I flinch at raised voices or feel guilty for prioritizing my own needs. Trauma doesn't just disappear because you escape the source of it. But I also have something I never had before: proof that I'm strong enough to survive, smart enough to fight back, and worthy of a life that doesn't revolve around serving people who see me as disposable. I built a career from nothing. I found friends who actually care about me. I created a life where I wake up every morning without that knot of dread in my stomach. My family taught me that I was worthless. I taught them that worth isn't something they get to define for me. The fire they tried to keep, tamped down to control and diminish, and ultimately extinguish, burned their world to the ground instead. And from those ashes, I built something new, something that's entirely mine, something they can never touch. They wanted me to stay small, stay grateful, stay trapped. Instead, I got free. And honestly, that's the best revenge I could have ever asked for. So here's my question for you. Have you ever had to walk away from people who were supposed to love you but only knew how to hurt you? What was your breaking point? Drop your story in the comments because I want to hear it. And if this story resonated with you, if you know someone who needs to hear that, it's okay to fight back against family toxicity. Hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Your support means everything, and your story matters too.